Hey everyone, I'm doing this proving the existence of God talk. I gave this talk about a week ago to a young adult group that I'm part of, Holy Family. I'm in Orange, California. I made this PowerPoint and I have the Windows docs and I am giving both of these free. Just click the link below in the live stream description. And then I hope you find this video useful. Yeah, let's get started. This talk isn't going to be touching upon scripture or theology that much, but rather natural theology or kind of what is known as natural science, namely the consideration of philosophy itself. That being said, the Catholic faith does say the following in the Second Vatican Council in De Verbum. It says, "The sacred synod affirms God, the beginning and end of all things, can be known with certainty from created realities by the light of human reason," De Verbum, section 6. And we will see how this touches upon what Scripture itself says, specifically with Paul to the Romans. So there are three types of arguments for the existence of God, three main modes of the proofs. There is what is known as the ontological, the cosmological, and the scientific arguments. And I'm going to touch mostly upon the cosmological arguments and show why I think the cosmological as well as the fine-tuning scientific arguments are the best. The ontological argument works, but as we will see, it takes some things for granted regarding what we know about God. With that being said, I'll start with the ontological argument. The ontological argument was made famous by Saint Anselm of Canterbury. This is a picture from the Chronicles of England, but his argument basically starts from what are known as a priori considerations. Priori or prior meaning before. So from what is before, from cause to effect, from God to effect. It is based on logical considerations and deduction. Once again, most famous is Saint Anselm's way. So Anselm's argument, just to simplify it, goes something like this. Namely, that God is the greatest and most perfect being that can be conceived. And for something to be perfect means it must exist. Hence, God exists because he is the most perfect logical conception, and perfection equals existence. This is taken from Anselm's own proslogion, where he kind of formulated or wrote down his argument. I quoted this from St. John Paul II's encyclical Fides et Ratio, section 14. But St. Anselm says, from, quote, "From, O Lord, you are not only that than which nothing greater can be conceived, than all that can be conceived. If you were not such, something greater than you could be thought, but this is impossible," end quote. One of the problems with this argument, even though I think it does work in general, is that it takes God to be self-evident to us. So what this means is that while the ontological argument for God is true in of itself, it's a valid argument, it takes it for granted that God exists, or that we can know self-evidently that God exists. It does this because it assumes God's existence as self-sufficient not only to God but to us. This is just the kind of where Saint Thomas Aquinas, who kind of disagreed with this argument, touches upon the problem with this argument. I won't go in regards, I won't quote this specific passage, but it will be included in the PowerPoint if you want to look at it. I will just summarize what St. Thomas Aquinas is saying, in that something is self-evident if every member of a genus understands something without demonstration. Namely, that humans are rational is self-evident to us. That the whole is greater than the part is also self-evident to us. But that God is real and perfect, and that his existence is that his essence is his existence is self-evident to God, but not to us. God knows this, but it's not a self-evident consideration in regards to us thinking about God. For that reason, this brings the cosmological argument for God. This argument posits that there must be a first cause or a necessary being that is not contingent upon anything else for its existence. Contingent means relying on something else for its existence. Since contingent things exist, there must be something that exists necessarily, having its own nature as the reason for its existence. And so from the cosmological arguments, we will look specifically into the 5 proofs of Saint Thomas Aquinas, as well as, to a lesser extent, what is known as the Kalam Cosmological Argument. So what is finite causality? The cosmological argument for the existence of God is a philosophical argument that infers God's existence from the existence and causation of the universe. It is based on a premise that everything that exists must have a cause, and that this chain of causes must ultimately lead to a first cause that is uncaused, which is identified as God. This argument is based not on a priori considerations, but on a posteriori. Posteriori meaning post, what comes after the fact. And Father John Hardin says, quote, this means from what is after, that is, from effect back to cause, reasoning from experience or inductively. It's the opposite of a priori, and he says that this is the only valid proof for the existence of God. End quote. This is based on empirical observations, just like Aristotle, who was a biologist. His philosophy was very a posteriori, and touching upon the 4 causes, as we will see, but it is based not deductively from God to creation, but from creation to God. And this is in line with what Scripture says, specifically with St. Paul in Romans 1:20, when he says, quote, ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made, end quote. And then there are some preliminary terms in order to make sense specifically of Aquinas' 5 proofs for the existence of God, as well as to some extent, the Kalam Cosmological Argument and some other kind of interrelated concepts. We must know what some of these terms mean, namely, what is sufficient reason, the causal principle, the ENNF or ex nihilo principle, act and potency, form and matter, and the 4 causes. So what does it mean to be in act? To be in act simply means to be actually in a present state. It means to exist as something currently is. So if we were to say there is this thing right here, right now, that is a rubber ball, we are saying that there's a being, there's an object that is a ball. So that's the form, and it's made out of rubber. That's the matter. And then there's what are known as the accidental qualities, those things that are not particular to the thing itself, but can be changed, altered, seen, namely the color. So, in this case, there's a blue or yellow rubber ball that are currently existing actually right now. This is the opposite of potency, change. To be in potency simply means the capacity to become something in act. Change is simply the act of realizing some potency or reducing it to act. An example is a car is potentially only in existence, but once it is fully assembled, then an actual car exists. Until then, it is only potentially a car. And change means any type of change. It doesn't just mean locomotion or movement from one place to another. This could be a change in a state, such as ice becoming a water or gas, or vice versa. It could be accidental or essential. Essential meaning a change in the actual substance of the thing. Accidental meaning a change not in what the thing is, but only in some of its physical characteristics, like the color that we saw. or some other thing that keeps it the same substance but makes it look different. Two things to be said about potencies or change. Namely, they must be built into the nature of a thing. A rubber ball, just a regular rubber ball, if you throw it, it's not just going to start flying on its own. That's not part of its nature. Number two, in order to become actual, they must be brought into act by something else. A rubber ball cannot melt itself. It needs to be melted by something else. This is what we just saw. A rubber ball has the potential of being melted and turned into goo, but rubber cannot melt itself, nor can ice turn itself into water on its own. There is, whether we see the agent or not, there is always something else that is already in act, bringing about something else to be in act. This is what Aquinas says. So these are the next 3 slides are 4 quotes from Aquinas. The first one is, quote, potency does not raise itself to act. It must be raised to act by something that is in act, end quote. Likewise, whatever is moved, it must be moved by another. Act is prior to potency. And lastly, Aquinas says that in everything which is moved, changed, and hence having potency, there is some kind of composition to be found, namely act and potency. So what is form and matter? Matter is simply the chemical or material makeup of a thing. Form is the shape, nature, or essence. And this touches upon the famous Aristotle's famous 4 causes. There's the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and a final cause. The material is simply the chemical or material makeup of a thing. The efficient cause is that which brings something, that which actualizes an effect or brings something about. The final cause is the purpose of an action. And lastly, the form is the shape, nature, or essence. It's critical to know the form, so the form of a table, namely to sit and eat. It has 4 legs, it has some type of top. The purpose of the table is to sit and eat. That which brought it into existence, it's maybe a carpenter or some type of factory. And we will see the efficient cause and a final cause will be most important, especially when we consider Aquinas' 5th proof for the existence of God, the argument from intelligence. Aquinas' first proof, God as a moved mover. So Aquinas' first way, the first argument shows that God must exist as well as that he must be one. As we have stated, a thing cannot bring itself from potency to act. How change happens, we saw that rubber has a chemical potential to become melted and turned into goo. However, rubber cannot achieve this on its own power. It is only by being melted through something else, heat, an external thing already in the actual state of, say, fire, that it is only melted. And as you can see, this itself, namely a fire melting the rubber, can only happen, in this case, let's say by a match, which is itself ignited by a hand. So let us say that it was through the actions of a man's hand lighting a fire that the match was lit. But this itself requires the muscles of the man's hand working. And those muscles require the motor neurons of the muscles working, and so forth, until you get to a first cause. Likewise, if you see a series of boxcars, the boxcar, it's the part apart from the engine that holds either people, or it might hold cargo, or if it's an industrial train. But if you see just a boxcar and it's moving, you know that there's another boxcar, and eventually there has to be a first engine moving all the other boxcars. But the thing is, you need to get to a first engine. If there was an infinite amount of engines, or an infinite amount rather of boxcars, then no boxcar would actually be moving. This means that we can't go infinitely backward. This is what is known as an essentially ordered series. An essentially ordered series is something, let's say, like a chain of turning gears, in which everything is turning at the same time. If you remove one component, everything else stops. This is based on a cause-effect relationship. It cannot go infinitely backward. And what this shows is that God is pure act and hence the unmoved mover. God is the first cause, and as we will see in the Aquinas' second proof for the existence of God, this is because God is by nature pure act, and for something to be pure act means there's no capacity to change. Something that is pure act is known as the unmoved mover. He is the first cause of everything, moving everything, but he himself is not changed, because once again, potency means the capacity to change. God is thus the unmoved mover, the cause of all change, without himself being changed. This is just a diagram showing pure act to pure potency and everything in between. God is pure act. God, the unmoved mover, unchanged, or the unchanged changer. Act with creation, which is angels. God is uncreated pure spirit. Angels are created pure spirits. Act with creation. Humans are what are known as hylomorphic beings, namely we are made up of both form and matter. Act with form and matter, and then pure potency is nothing, at least not anything currently, until it is brought into existence. Aquinas' second way, it's tied to the first way, but unlike the unmoved mover, we're talking about God as first cause, and namely the difference between essence and existence. So what is essence? Essence means the form, that we touched upon, or at least it's synonymous with form. Essence means the nature or definition that best fundamentally describes the type of thing something is, and this is definitely true of natural beings and forces, but I would argue you can also do it with human artifacts like clocks. So when we talk about, how do we know things? How do we identify things? What does it mean to be a human? Is it that we have brains? Is it that we have two legs? Well, Aristotle's definition, it's that we are what are known as rational animals. What this means is that there's a genus called animality. So, I would say that there's even a broader genus that we can call just kind of animated beings, because plants, animals, and humans are all animated. We have souls, and I would argue, at least from current knowledge, these are the only beings that have a soul. Plants, animals, and humans. Plants are the most basic life form, for they have a soul, but they take in nutrients. That's about only thing they can do with photosynthesis and things of that nature. Animals have locomotion and passions. So we fall in the same genus as dogs and coyotes, elephants, and any other animal, including amphibians. Namely, that we have locomotion and we are able to have passions and feelings. But with this genus, we have the species called human beings, and a species has a specific difference, and that specific difference, which separates us from other animals, is that we have a rational, spiritual nature, namely that we have an intellect. Unlike a dog or even a dolphin, which is highly intelligent in the sense of being able to memorize patterns, and having pattern recognition, we as humans have the ability to abstract. In the case of clock, we can say that the essence of a clock is to tell time. But let me ask you a question. Have you seen this lizard? What if I were to describe a lizard that is known as the Basiliscus animalis, and explain that it is a rare species of a reptile, and that this lizard is found in the basilisk family, And what if I were to describe all the lizard's essence and its various properties and say that at its most fundamental level, what makes this lizard, its essence is that it has a regal crest with feathers, and that when the lizard feels threatened or excited, that crest unfurls like a fan, revealing hues that shift from azure to fiery orange. Well, the reality is that this lizard doesn't actually exist. As a matter of fact, I used AI to make a fictitious lizard and told AI to give me just a generic essence or nature and properties of this lizard. Likewise, have you heard about this bird? Well, this bird only exists in the mythical realm. It is a phoenix, which is a bird that burns itself in a funeral pyre and rises from the ashes. The point of this exercise is that there's a distinction between essence and existence. What this shows is that, for something to exist right now entails that it is actually in act, namely actually existing. But things can only potentially exist. So what this shows is that God's essence is to exist. This shows that to actually exist, to be brought from potency to act, and must be brought about by something that is already in existence. God's essence is to exist. We saw that God is pure act, meaning that there is no potentiality in God. And for that reason is that God's essence and his existence are one and the same thing. The nature of God is for him to exist. This is what Saint Thomas Aquinas says when he says the following, quote, "I can understand what a man is or what a phoenix is, and nevertheless not know whether either has existence in reality. Therefore, it is clear that existence is something other than the essence or quiddity or being, unless perhaps there is something whose quiddity or being is its very own existence, and this thing must be one and primary," end quote, namely God. Aquinas' third argument from necessity. This touches upon what we saw in one of the first slides of the ENNP or ENNF principle. Ex nihil nihil fit. From nothing, nothing comes. It basically says that from nothing, nothing is produced. Imagine a blank canvas, no colors, no shape, just emptiness. According to this principle, you can't create a beautiful painting on that canvas without starting with some paint, brush, or an idea. And not just this empty cup right here, but even if this cup were not in existence. This touches upon the difference between contingent and necessary being. Contingent being, it's any being that is created, which by its definition, created means it has a cause. This is distinct from necessary being or uncreated being that brings about all other contingent beings. And this is the kind of the problem of I think it's Richard Dawkins I think Christopher Dawkins or whoever wrote the God Delusion, where he kind of watered down Aquinas' argument in regards to God as the first cause and the first cause not needing a cause. What Aquinas is saying is that God is the only truly necessary being and everything else is contingent. So it's not that everything that exists must have a cause, as Richard Dawkins tried to argue, but rather what Aquinas is saying is that everything that is created has to have a cause. God is not created. Contingent things are. But nevertheless, what this principle is saying is that if everything was contingent, then nothing would exist in reality, because everything would rely on something else for its existence. For that reason, this Catholic philosopher Alexander Proust says the following, quote, "In one of its cosmological forms, it says that a universe with an empty past will not have a non-empty present or future," end quote. in other words, the conclusion is we wouldn't be here. If there were no necessary beings, everything would be contingent. Contingent means relying on something else. But if everything relied on something else, then that means there would be nothing in existence. Hence, there would be an infinite regress of contingent beings, which means there would be nothing in existence. I'm going to finish touching upon the last two arguments from Saint Thomas Aquinas, but I thought it would be good to bring the Kalam Cosmological Argument, as I believe it best ties with Aquinas' first three proofs for the existence of God. So we saw that God, or that there must be a finite amount of causes. We saw that God is the unmoved mover, and that he is the first cause, and that he is a necessary being. And so the Kalam Cosmological Argument kind of complements these three proofs by being based on three syllogisms. A syllogism is a premise that is followed by another premise and reaches a conclusion. And so the Kalam syllogism says, number one, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Number two, the universe began to exist. And hence, number three, therefore, the universe has a cause. The second and third premise of the Kalam Cosmological Argument has been subject to vigorous debate. Definitely the first premise, it's absolutely true. But I believe that the second and third premise could also be validated. Nevertheless, as we saw, there cannot be an infinite amount of causes, nor can there be an infinite collection of things. Otherwise, contradictions and paradoxes happen. I won't play this video. It is an embedded video. And so if you want to look at it, I would highly encourage you to look at it. And once again, it's embedded to this free PowerPoint. So if you click the link below, you will get access to all of this. But I'm just going to simplify the argument for you, and that is that it is related to the so the video that I embedded, it touches upon an analogy about why we can't have an infinite collection of things or an infinite amount of causes. So imagine that there's someone named Fred who is sleeping in bed, and there's a problem. He's about to be killed because there's a Grim Reaper that is going after him. It's Fred's time to die, so the Grim Reaper, it's here to kill Fred. But there's a problem. It's not just one Grim Reaper, it's an infinite amount of Grim Reapers. And the problem is that in order for one of the Grim Reapers to kill Fred, they must wait until the one before kills Fred. And that one has to wait until the one before Fred. But there's a problem with this, because if there's an infinite amount of Grim Reapers that are working in time, in succession, and then the question is, which is the Grim Reaper that killed Fred? Well, it's a logical contradiction. None of them could kill Fred, for there's an infinite amount of Grim Reapers waiting for each other to be the first to kill Fred. So what this argument shows is that it is related to the causal principle, as well as the impossibility of an infinite regress of causes. An infinite regress of causes would amount to nothing, and as we have seen, nothing produces nothing. So for that reason, you can't have an infinite collection in reality. Many people use transfinite math as in set theory to argue for an actual infinite. And the thing is that an actual infinite can exist in the mind. It's something we can conceive of, but it's something that can't actually exist metaphysically. And as we will see in, I think it might be a slide or two, there are many things that we can conceive or imagine in the mind, but that cannot actually exist metaphysically in the real world. So as you can see, in regards to this is what is known as transfinite math. It is based on set theory. And there's a symbol, the omega symbol, which is the one that looks like the W, that in set theory is used to show an example or to illustrate the infinite. But the thing is, as you can see in math, in our mind, we can keep rearranging things. So you can do infinity plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, or infinity times infinity, and infinity squared, and infinity cubed. You can do all these sorts of set notations, infinity squared plus infinity and infinity cubed. And then you can go on, infinity to the power of infinity, to the power of another infinity. But the problem is, how does this work in the actual world? This touches upon the paradox of David Hilbert's famous hotel, which is an infinite hotel existing in the actual world. It has an infinite number of rooms that are occupied, but the problem is new guests keep arriving, an infinite amount of new guests. How does the proprietor arrange this? As in set theory, the owner would have to keep rearranging the guests, move guests from room 1 to 2, and shifting the numbers, move guests from 2 to 4, and so on to infinity. But is this hotel possible? Something can be something can be kind of conceptually possible, but not necessarily physically possible, or I would argue even metaphysically possible. For example, in math, you can have multiple answers. For example, if you're using the quadratic formula, or if you are factoring, you can have, let's say, a positive answer and a negative answer. You can have plus 2 or minus 2. But the problem is, in the real world, in the physical world, how do you have negative numbers? How do you have, by what I mean by negative numbers, it's not just a negative number, but how do you have negative causal agents? You can have negative numbers in, say, finance if you owe money, but you can't have a negative amount of numbers, let's say, delivering pizza to a place. That's just logically absurd if it's applied to the actual world. Likewise, can time be infinite? Something can be infinite in one of two ways. Something can be eternal, let's say, if it has no beginning and no end, but it can also be eternal or everlasting, eternal, if it has a beginning but no end. But how do you transgress the infinite? To use another analogy, if you're driving home from work, the longer the traffic, the longer it will take you to get home. But how do you get home if there's an infinite amount of traffic, an infinite amount of cars? Well, that's impossible. You can't travel, you can't transgress an actual infinite. Likewise, if time were eternal, how do you get to the present moment? There must be one necessary cause. The actual infinite cannot exist. The universe and time are created, hence they are caused to exist. The first necessary cause is God. God is properly the only thing that we can call infinite, and he's infinite because he exists outside of time, and infinite also means is God's infinite perfection. Now we can move on to Aquinas' fourth argument from perfection. God as perfect and perfectly good. This touches upon Plato's idea of the forms. This idea is based on the degree of being and perfection. Being means having existence, and things can have existence to various degrees of perfection. But do things exist perfectly in individual objects in the real world? So there are, think of an abstract concept, whether it's a square, a circle, or a triangle. Just to give the example of a triangle, we would say that a triangle is an abstract concept which consists of a three-sided closed shape. So that's the essence of the concept of a triangle. But the thing is, does a perfect triangle exist in the real world? Namely like Plato's archetype. Well, obviously there can be a sloppy triangle drawn by a kid in a moving car. It's still a triangle, but it's very imperfect and sloppy, and yeah, not perfect. A professional triangle, we could say it's more perfect. It better resembles a what a perfect triangle is. Namely, if it is used by a protractor or a compass. But I would argue that even a digitalized triangle, a computerized triangle, isn't perfect. I don't know if you've ever tried this, but when you zoom into a digital object, generally, the closer you get, the more pixelated it becomes, i.e., imperfect. Hence, there is no such thing as perfect objects or perfect, even abstract concepts existing in the real world. Likewise, goodness and perfection. A thing is good and perfect insofar as it has being. It also confirms to the nature for which something is directed. A good knife is good only insofar as something has a shape capable of allowing it to cut. We call a dull knife bad if it doesn't cut anymore. And likewise, a good pencil is good if it writes. Likewise, moral goodness means having the proper virtues, being filled with virtues. Vice is the absence. That's what evil means. Evil is not a positive thing, but rather the negation of goodness. It's the absence of, if an ontological evil would be losing an arm, we have what is known as privation. We are deprivated of something that naturally belongs to us, or eyesight. A moral evil, it's the deprivation of virtues. So God is perfect, and all the ideas and goodness exist perfectly in God, who is the divine intellect. He is the archetype in which Plato tried to arrive at, but kind of failed by putting it in some type of third dimension. But God is infinite being himself. He is perfection itself. This is just a diagram of Plato's theory of the forms. As you can see God, the one, the true, the beautiful, good being. God is pure act, so he is goodness and perfection itself. And then non-being, pure potency, complete darkness. Evil, non-being. Humans are somewhere in between, the angels and things of that nature. Lastly, Aquinas' fifth way from intelligence. God is perfect and perfectly good. So this argument is not based on intelligent design. We will briefly kind of touch upon this in a fine-tuning argument, but Aquinas' fifth argument is not based on complexity or complex and living organisms. Namely, that removing any component would render them non-functional. From this, intelligent design argues that gradual alteration through random mutation, natural selection couldn't explain these complex systems, nor is it based on the watchmaker analogy popularized by William Paley, in which the intricate designs of a watch show design. Rather, Aquinas' argument is heavily based on Aristotle's four causes, and specifically the efficient and final cause. So we touched upon the four causes. The efficient cause is that which brings about an effect, that which actualizes an effect, such as a match, lighting rubber and melting it. Final cause is the purpose, and this is known as teleology. And this is definitely the last two causes, efficient and final cause, are most important in Aquinas' fifth argument. Efficient causes. The efficient cause is what actualizes an effect, that which brings something about. A match is what actualizes the potential of rubber to melt and turn into goo. Lightning is what causes a tree to catch on fire. And one of the things about Aquinas' arguments, namely, remember about potentialities, that it is built onto something's nature. So lightning doesn't have the capacity to produce ladybugs or life, but it does have the capacity to catch a tree on fire, and fire itself doesn't have the capacity to freeze or to start singing or whatnot, but it has the capacity to melt, to also catch things on fire. And likewise, final causes is that for the sake of which it is the purpose for which something is directed. It states that things are naturally directed to specific effects or ends. For example, eating is directed towards the fulfillment of one's nature. This is where the natural law falls in, namely that we ought to do things that fulfill our nature, namely, practice or eat, do natural things like eat and exercise, but also practice the virtues. And vice or evil, it's that which frustrates a nature. So lack of eating, even definitely this is true of a lot of sexual morals. If something is not within the purpose of what the sexual act is meant for, namely the procreation of a male and female, in the sacrament of matrimony for the purpose of procreation. But the natural law touches upon many other things like, stealing, lying. These are things contrary to the natural law, because we have a duty to be truthful, and we're entitled to the truth. Obviously, stealing, we have private property. So these are just examples in touching upon final causes. What's the purpose of something? Likewise, Aquinas says that an agent acts for an end. Quote, every agent acts for an end, otherwise one thing would not follow more than another from the action of the agent, unless it were by chance, end quote. So what is an agent, once again? By a agent, Aquinas means not just thinking agents like humans, but any natural force. If X is the efficient cause of Y, then Y is the final cause of X. The thing to note is that in order to bring an effect, a cause must inherently be directed towards a certain effect or range of effects. So take example even of biology. So even evolution itself, it's teleological. Biology itself is teleological, meaning, it is directed towards a range of effects, namely to pump life and blood to the rest of cells. And this is true of every other muscle and biological force. And so what we can gather is that there must be an external intelligence keeping things in order. So a lot of these forces, whether it be lightning, biological forces like our heart, these are, man is conscious, but what about a heart, muscle, and other human anatomies? So there must be an external intelligence keeping things in order. For the things themselves, natural forces are unconscious, but God is that thing keeping order and intelligence in creation. This means that God is intelligent. He is the sustainer of intelligence and of all things in existence, which means God is personal and all-knowing and all-powerful. And this finishes Aquinas' 5 proofs for the existence of God in a Kalam Cosmological Argument. Now we will finish this talk specifically by touching upon the fine-tuning argument, which is based a lot on scientific constants, but also the laws of the second laws of thermodynamics in the chaos and chance. So the second law of thermodynamics states that certain kinds of processes happen in only one direction. It states that the state of entropy will increase over time, ceteris paribus, all things remaining equal, meaning that there's no external thing kind of manipulating this process of the laws of second law of thermodynamics. So what is entropy? Think of entropy as the molecular disorder or randomness within a system that is naturally increasing over time. The second law of thermodynamics states that the state of entropy will always increase over time, once again, all things remaining equal. This is what is known as the arrow of time. uh, so entropy in action. A cup of coffee naturally getting cold over time. Men get older and not younger. Ashes in a fireplace don't turn into ice. And if a dish breaks, it doesn't naturally reassemble. And think about, just the disorder, and specifically the chance and probability of a pool table. When the ball strikes the balls, they scatter. But can scattered balls perfectly rearrange themselves by itself? Well, this is physically possible. It is statistically very improbable. Namely, that the chance of balls getting scattered upon impact is significantly high, and the chances of scattered balls rearranging themselves in a perfect way, it's almost non-existent. Um, this touches upon precision and fine tuning. Let me. So yeah, here lies the fine tuning argument, namely that the structure of the universe is balanced on a razor's edge, and this precise setting of the structure of the universe is what we mean by fine tuning. And I'm going to give this quote, which is in the Word document that I'm giving for free if you click the link below, which has all the quotes and sources that I'm using for this PowerPoint and for this video. But this quote, it's from Rasmussen, Joshua, and Felipe Leon, 2008. It's got the best explanation of things, and it says, quote, "The fundamental structure of the universe is balanced on a razor's edge for the existence of life. This precise setting of the structure of the universe for life is called the fine-tuning of the cosmos. This fine-tuning falls into three major categories: that of the laws of nature, that of the constants of physics, and that of the initial conditions of the universe. A universe with nothing but empty space has no ingredients for life. A million motionless particles, which is depicted by these molecules just flying around, will never produce an amoeba. A universe with only particles that constantly repel each other, like a magnet, will produce an endless scatter with no complex unities anywhere ever. A universe with things that only attract each other will only form a blob forever," end quote. So yeah, the consequences of a non-fine-tuned argument would be just chaos. It'd be high entropy, high disorder, constant black holes, and ultimately an empty space and void. Yeah. And then, so this touches upon the scientific constants. So scientific constants are just various sorts of constants that have a specific equation to them. And the significance is that we can see that these constants are fine-tuned, for if they were changed even slightly, then the universe would be non-fine-tuned and various chaotic events and would happen, and basically no life would form and various other things, leading upon Aquinas' third argument, which touches upon the out of nothing, nothing comes, ex nihilo nihil principle that we touched upon. So some examples of the fine-tuning argument are the Penrose number, the cosmological constant, a change in a strong force constant and no hydrogen, change in gravitational constant, no stars, and change in weak force constants means no carbon. And these are just a few examples of various other examples of fine-tuning. The Penrose number is taken from the Emperor's New Mind, Roger Penrose. And just to simplify it, it means the extreme unlikelihood of the low entropy of the universe during the Big Bang. This number is 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123, or expressed logarithmically as 10 to 10,123. This is just the kind of the math behind the equation, if you want to look at it, but it's basically the final number it's showing it's 1 divided by the Penrose number, which is 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123, which is significantly and extremely unlikelihood probability for low entropy existing during the time of the Big Bang. Low entropy, once again, means just order, very orderly, as opposed to high entropy, which is chaotic. And this argument is strengthened by an equation that Father Robert Spitzer came up with, or he didn't come up with, but he illustrates in his book New Proofs for the Existence of God in regards to the finite number of tries for the existence of entropy at the absolute beginning of the Big Bang to a very finite number. And this number, he states, quote, is derived from the following equation: 13.7 billion years, age of the observable universe, times 365 days, times 24 hours, times 60 minutes, times 60 seconds, times 1043, which is reduction to minimum units of time, Planck time, times 1053 kilograms of visible mass in the observable universe, times 108, reduction to minimum units of mass. And so the number on the left, it's the number of tries that Father Robert Spitzer is showing. And he's showing that even though 10 to the power of 120, it's a pretty large number, it is insignificant once one divides the total number of tries to the likelihood of a low entropy in the time of the Big Bang. And so this number is significantly minuscule, almost infinitely small, based on calculus assumption or jargon. Now this is the second argument for a fine-tuned universe, namely that the Big Bang was not only big, it was a perfect bang. The cosmological constant was perfect for a perfect explosion. It was neither too low, which would result in no explosion of creation, nor too high, too destructive. This ratio of the Big Bang to be perfectly stable had to be in a position of 1 divided by 10 to the power of 55. And so I'm going to give another quote. This is from D. Overman, A Case Against Accident and Self-Organization. Quote, if the force of explosion was only slightly higher, the universe would only consist of gas without stars, galaxies, or planets. Without stars, galaxies, and planets, life could not exist. The matching had to be to the remarkable precision of 1 part in 10 to the 55. Some physicists believe that one explanation can be found in a model of an inflationary epoch at about 10 to the power of negative 35 of the first second, where a short period of accelerated expansion caused a perfect balance between gravity and the rate of expansion in density and critical density. This could explain the very flat characteristics of the universe given by these precise matchings, but the inflation required in this model would itself require an extraordinary fine-tuning to yield the precisely balanced result. If the inflationary model is true, the inflationary epoch would contain enormous fine-tuning, and the precision of values issued as only removes one step. End quote. And the third example of a fine-tuning argument is namely that the universe is water-philiac or H2O-philiac. This touches upon the strong force constant, no hydrogen if slightly altered. The strong force constant is Gs equals 15. If this constant were slightly off by even just 2%, this would have prevented hydrogen and other conditions necessary for life. And Paul Davies, in An Accidental Universe, states that a 2%, if this constant were just 2% lower, it would have prevented nuclei and elements higher than hydrogen. If it was 2% higher, then all the hydrogen would have been converted to helium, which means that the universe would have no water, and no long-term fuel for the stars. The fourth argument is no stars have different gravitational constant. The gravitational constant is G equals 6.67 times 10 to the negative power of 11. If this constant were slightly different, then no stars. If gravity were slightly weaker or electromagnetism stronger, then we would only have red dwarfs. Once again taken from Paul Davies, page 71 to 73, and likewise from the same page, it changed the other way and we would have only blue giants. Likewise, the universe is pro-life in being also carbon-philiac. This is taken from the weak force coupling constant, GW equals 1.43 times 10 to the negative power of 62. If this constant changed slightly, then it would be impossible for a carbon to exist. That means no building blocks for life. There's a quote where Paul Davies in page 68 of Accidental Universe says, we owe the presence of the carbon in our bodies, the iron core for planet, and the uranium in our nuclear reactors to supernovae that occurred before the solar system formed. This is the quote, and he says that if the weak force constant had been even weaker, then the neutrinos would not be able to exert enough pressure on the outer envelope of the star to cause a supernova explosion. On the other hand, if it was much stronger, then the neutrinos would be trapped inside the core and rendered impotent. So one of the objections is, so you're telling me there's a chance, just like this famous meme from Dumb and Dumber where he gets rejected and the girl says there's 1 in a million chances that I will go out with you. Obviously, yeah, many people object that low probability means that things could be possible at some point or another. They talk about weather formation and lottery tickets and other kind of natural phenomena, but this is not comparable specifically to things like the fine-tuning argument. The reality is that there are various analogies that show why this is the case. Think about plagiarism. If two kids in high school or college or even middle school or whatnot were to turn in let's say a 5-page essay that was absolutely identical in every single way with the same number of words and semicolons and grammar, or at the very least very, very like the other, let's say 90% similar. Yeah, it doesn't matter. The question is, would the teacher be like, well, maybe it was just chance, a very low chance, but it could happen? No, the teacher would rightfully chide the child and punish them for plagiarism. And yeah, it is impossible. It is nearly impossible for a chimp to completely word for word type out all of the words and works of Shakespeare. Take the analogy of a trained marksman, or specifically 100 professionally trained marksmen. If they were to miss their target that they had to kill, would you say this was mere chance, or would the person surviving be like, I survived due to chance? No, obviously this would be either a miracle or that they conspired together to purposefully miss. Or take into example an archer were to draw. Here's an analogy of an archer hitting all their targets. If the target after hitting all the bullseyes were to draw circles around where he threw the arrows, that would be falsification. It'd be a fraud and forgery. But if the archer were to perfectly hit the bullseyes that already existed, this would be specification. Hitting all the bullseyes, the vast majority of possible values. So this analogy shows that the vast majority of possible values should not generally allow for life. The range of values that are allowed for life is extremely small, A small deviation from the existing values would result in a lifeless universe, yet the universe is completely fine-tuned. Hence, this presupposes design, and this concludes the best proofs for the existence of God. What do you think? I would love for you to, uh, just write down your comments, what you thought about this video. Definitely feel free to share this video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this. If you would like to donate to help me make more videos like this, also check out my works. I've written 2 books, one on Sola Scriptura, which also has an audiobook, and one on the Ten Commandments Simplified and Explained. I'm currently working on an audiobook right now. So if you would like to check these works out, or if you would like to help donate to help me make more content, I left the donate link down below. God bless you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.